Hi, everyone. This is Rosie here. So today we have with us Paula Salinas, who has been an attorney for over 29 years. And I have, read about her. I've worked with her through my title companies, and she has done a phenomenal job on our transactions. And the reason I wanted to highlight her experience today is because um, from my few conversations I've had with Paula, she has displayed how she carries a wealth of knowledge to help navigate people make best choices. And while we live in the world where everything is so vague and everybody is flooded with information, having somebody who specializes in their craft can really help us narrow down what's really important. So I would love to ask some really valuable questions to Paula today and see how we can be of best value to you in our conversation. So, Paula, thank you so much for choosing to talk to us today. So, for everyone, thank you. So, for everyone who's listening and they might not know, the extent of work we're and the services we're going to talk about today, would you share with us, like, how do you happen to be where you are today? Like, I'm sure we all start somewhere, and here you are with all the experience and work you have done. Take it away, please.
Okay, well, we don't want to be here all day, so how I got here is one thing. But basically, I became a lawyer after not particularly wanting to be a lawyer, but I started working for when I was in high school, working for my father, who had a title company.
Yes.
And one of the things that we found a lot of times is that working for a lawyer, working for the title company, would get really frustrated dealing with lawyers who wanted to tell everybody what to do and ended up causing more problems than just solving the problem and getting property sold and transferred. So when I started practicing law, I did a whole bunch of different things, but I had a basis in real estate transactions because of working in the title company. And I ended up, after several years sort of focusing on probate matters, I do all kinds of real estate matters, but as a general rule, most of my practice is related to probate, guardianships, and probates and estate planning.
Yeah.
My goal is always to help people solve problems, and it's more gratifying in this area because I knew something about it. It's very, very complicated for a lot of people, but really it's not that complicated, and it's something that I can do and solve something that is sometimes it's just absolutely overwhelming for clients who get frozen and don't take care of problems. My job is, I believe that the job of a lawyer is to help people solve their problems.
Yes.
And so that's always what my focus is. I don't like to get involved in litigation and those sorts of things. I just want to go through, get this done so that people can move on with their lives. And
yes.
Probate lets me do that because it helps them at a difficult time of their lives. And oftentimes they first come because they realize there's a problem because now they've got a house or a piece of property that they have to get sold and they don't know where to start.
Yes. And Paula, Paula, I got to know you through my real estate world when we did some probate transactions together, and I got to really see your work through some of my escrow officers. And I was very pleased with all the work that you got done. For people who are listening who don't know what probate is, and, they probably have a will and, and have real estate, and they might not understand what it entails. Would you help us educate? Like, what is probate and how easy and difficult it is in Texas?
Okay. First of all, the horror stories that you hear about trying to avoid probate really don't apply in the same way, generally speaking, in Texas, the way they do in a lot of other states. And so really, if you have a will or a family member has a will, then it's pretty straightforward. That's probably the most important thing that I can say is that do your estate planning and make sure that you have a will, because it makes everything quicker, cleaner, less expensive. But the probate process is pretty simple. And I always tell people that probate comes from a Latin root that means to prove. So it's if you speak Spanish, the word is probar, which means just to prove. What we're doing is that when someone dies, you prove to the court that there was a death you prove that there's a will, and you prove that the person who was named in the will, hopefully to be an independent executor,
Mm-hmm.
um, is qualified to be the executor. You go
Mm-hmm.
in, you show this to the court, you prove those things, and the court names an executor who then has the authority to manage the estate without any involvement by the court.
Got it.
And that is the simple way of getting it done. A will has to be probated within 4 years. If not, it can still be probated, but it becomes much more complicated. It ends up being more costly. But a will, just having a will, unless it's been probated, it has no effect.
Yes.
A lot of people hold on to the wills forever because they think they have to get everything organized beforehand. And it's just simpler if you go to an attorney to begin with, and they can help you get it organized and administer an estate. The
Yes.
probate proceeding itself is that simple, if there's a will.
Very nice. You said it so clearly and such a clear, defined definition. I'm so glad, So listeners who are listening out there, guys, please know that we're talking specifically about real estate that's acquired through a will. And I have often been in real estate profession. I work with so many people who are really finding it a very hard job in addition to the lives they're living, that they have to get started with the probate. They think they have to put all the ducks in the row before they call the probate attorney. And Paul, I really want to emphasize that because I call them and ultimately they hear from you that they can get started. So two things that you had mentioned to me, that Texas is one of the only states where probate is super simple to get started with, and it can be done without putting all the ducks in the row on that. And share with me, if people don't do it and they sit on it because they're finding it overwhelming or the fear of, or just the emotional reasons as well, what could be the consequences?
Well, there are two things, and what I'd also like to emphasize is that if there isn't a will, there are ways of getting the property, the title to the property cleared up so that it can be
Okay,
sold.
very nice.
And so that would be a different process. There are three ways. You've got the probate of the will. You've got a case where you may have to ask the court to make a declaration of who the heirs are and
Mm-hmm.
to name someone, give someone the authority to make that sale. But sometimes if there's not a will, um, and and you don't want to you don't want to probate the will for a variety of reasons, you can also sometimes do an affidavit of heirship that you just file with the deed records, and that works well when people are all in agreement and you know who all of the heirs are, and there
Mm-hmm.
are no debts and there are other things. But a lawyer can help you figure out the best way at the beginning of how to proceed and to minimize the problems by getting started within that 4-year period. Hopefully sooner than that, but at least in that 4-year period.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, what happens oftentimes is that, say, mom dies and she's 90 years old and she's lived in her house all this time, and everybody waits. You've got grandsons living in the house, and nobody's paying the taxes because everybody says, well, it belongs to all of us.
Yeah.
There begins dissension. And that's usually what happens, is that the bills build up and nobody wants to be the one who pays it because they're afraid they're not going to get paid back. And what happens is that it now becomes very difficult because you've got to figure out who gets it, how do you get someone who's in the house out of the house, who has the authority to sign a contract to sell it, to decide the sales price. It just becomes monumentally more difficult because of
Mm-hmm.
the hoops that you have to jump through.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have an independent executor, if a will has been done, all that you have to do is hire a real estate agent, sign a contract, and sell the property.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that the will, there are details, but those are the kinds of things that a lawyer can help you work through. If you
Yes.
don't do it, for example, let's say that you don't probate the will, and let's say that one of the sons has died. Well, now you have to
Wow.
probate the son's estate as well, because his interest has to be determined. And if he didn't have a will, I've done a case not too long ago where there was a fight about a will, but but this happens a lot of times when a will can't be probated. And what happened was, in the course of it, we finally got a declaration of who the heirs were, but one of the sons died. And so then we had to do a probate of that son. Finally got that done, trying to find all of the heirs. And then when we got ready to distribute, another person had died.
Wow.
Got that taken care of, and because there was a fight and there were some difficulties and poor communication, what happened in that case then is that person died. Another person died about a week after we finally got the order of the court to be able to distribute everything. And now I'm having to do an estate, a third. So grandma dies, son dies, grandson dies, and now I have to do the probate of the grandson, and she died before we got that done.
Wow.
And so you can imagine, if there had been an independent executor that could have done this all at one time, that person would have been able to take care of all of that and arrange that sort of stuff for themselves, and get it done much more quickly. But as it was,
wow. So it
you know,
sounds
and
like
so it's very expensive. And so the people who end up making money are the attorneys. And that's not the way that people want their estate to go. They want it
yes. And especially when I have often found personal representatives or executives that I end up talking with, it's like a full-time job in addition to their lifetime in their daily work, and to connect with siblings and put everybody on the same page. In the beginning, people are excited they can get work done, but as life gets hefty and busy, the same burden becomes bigger and bigger to handle. And the biggest concern I have seen is that I'm so glad you highlighted that while the will is getting probated, people can move on with the real estate portion by getting different advices from attorneys on how they can conclude the sale. Because I've often found houses, if they're vacant, insurance companies wouldn't insure it after 30 days. So if the roof leak happened, in addition to all the property taxes or the mortgage, if there is any on the property, now there is an insurance that is not going to cover the roof, and it can cost anywhere between 7 to 10 grand. And
it's, I often tell people, here's the thing, is that there used to be a television commercial a long time ago for a brake company. And they had this guy, and he says, well, I can, need to fix your brakes, and they didn't do it. And the thing was, he says, well, you can pay me now or you can pay me later.
Later
costs more. It's a bigger problem, more complications. It's, the easiest thing in the world is to go and just get it started, or at least decide, okay, we're not going to get started right now, but get the advice to figure out and make a decision instead of having the decision made for you.
Yes.
Because you waited too long.
Yeah.
And as I said, I mean, it's the biggest problems and the biggest burdens come from waiting too long.
It becomes complicated.
Waiting beyond that 4 years, because that's when the costs and expenses of taxes and insurance and maintenance and just cutting the yard and all of that sort of stuff.
The condition of the property in general deteriorates so much. The desirability of a consumer for the estate. And so Paula, have you seen, I would love to hear from you. You seem to have such a wide experience with people. What do you think is their main holdup? Like when they are in the middle of the whole process, they know that I can call Paula, right? Like I've spoken to people, I give your contact information. What do you think after you meet with them? I'm sure there are people who say, I'm so glad that you made it happen. I wish I started earlier. So when you meet some people like that who wish they could have done it sooner, they didn't know it was so easy, what do you think was their main holdup? Where do you think people get stuck?
I think two things happen. Is I think a lot of times people simply do not know that they have to probate the will, and they think they need to work out an agreement in the family before they get started. And so they don't do it because someone doesn't agree, and so they just wait and they wait. Or what often happens is, like, dad dies. We don't probate dad's will because it left everything to mom. Well, then mom dies, and then they try to do it, and you realize that there were problems with dad's estate because dad had kids that were not mom's kids. and now we
It
can't
happens.
probate that will. And so it's mostly, a lot of times is they don't think it's necessary because of a situation like that, or
Mm-hmm.
they think they have to have the agreement before they get it all done. Sometimes what happens is they wait so long that by the time they get to the lawyer, everybody's mad and everybody's angry, and that delays everything. If
Yes.
if you get started early and you can have a lawyer who helps you communicate what's going on
Yes.
and explaining what's going to happen, then you can avoid those really bad, complicated situations, because you're clear and there's a clear understanding of where you're going with it. That
Right.
doesn't, so it's mostly, inaction because they think that they don't need to worry about it because it's not that important. The next reason would be is that they think they've got to have everything solved before they go to the lawyer. And the other thing is that people think it's going to be too expensive.
Too expensive.
And all I can say is again, the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets
It gets.
because the problems are magnified.
So,
Unless everybody's in agreement, and then why wait if everybody's in agreement? So,
so Paula, thank you so much. That's very generous of you to, being so open about what people should be aware of. Once we are aware, we become capable of making valuable decisions.
yeah.
So, Paula, so can
Well,
an
and
exec?
before we get started on that, let me just tell you what is required if
Yes.
you want to go to the lawyer. You need to
Yes,
have a death
please.
certificate.
Yep.
You need to have the will.
Yep.
You need to have the some social security numbers and things like that.
Hmm.
But really, that's all I need to get started. Is
That
a
I
death
was going to ask
certificate
that.
and the
That's so
will.
glad. Yeah, because I was astonished when I found out after a few conversations with you that they don't need much, and they normally have the will and the death certificate ready to go, and the social security numbers are not that hard to access. And now just a conversation with a probate attorney. That's it. And
Right.
now let me ask you a question, Paul. I came across this one client. So can an executor, let's suppose they have siblings in the will that are far away, and we're just not can
Mhm.
access it, but nobody has finances to take care of repairs at the house or pay for the insurance or the taxes or the payments, and now they have a need to. The money is going to come from the personal property sale or the
Mhm.
estate sale. Can an executor make a decision with the sale and put the money in a trust account at attorney's advice while everything else gets probated? Or how should they go about it if they're not
Okay.
able to track
Well,
all the siblings?
once an executor has been appointed by the court, and
Yes.
assuming that the will gives them the power to make the decisions on their own, if not, it's usually a fairly simple thing to go in and ask the court to give permission to make the sale.
Okay.
But the executor gets to make that decision on their own.
Okay.
They list it for sale. They and even in estates where you don't have an independent executor, you ask that you go hire your attorney, you get a contract, and then you go to the court and ask for approval of it based on the appraisal and things like that. But basically, if you've got an executor, the executor gets to make the decision. They enter into the contract, they sign it, and the sale can go through. In some situations, you don't. I have different people, different attorneys do it differently.
Hmm.
But I know that a lot of my clients are very cash poor, and so I will need to have a filing fee. And if
Hmm.
you have a will, a filing fee costs about $300. So maybe your expenses to the court and to the newspaper notices and things like that are going to come out to about $500. If you don't have a will or you wait too long, that cost goes up just for the filing fee to the court goes up
Wow.
to about $900.
Wow.
So,
Okay. So if you don't have a
so
will, it will go up to $900 for the filing
because
fee.
yes, because the court appoints an attorney to represent unknown missing heirs or heirs that may be under a disability, which means that they're children or they're incapacitated. Like you've got someone who's got Alzheimer's or something like that.
Hmm.
But other than that, and I don't know any attorney who will advance those fees in a probate matter. It's just it's better to just know that you need to come up with the filing fee. Some attorneys, and in some cases, when I know that people cannot afford the fees, I will wait to have my attorney's fees paid out of the proceeds of the sale.
Very
And
kind.
so it just
Yeah.
comes out like any other expense, like the
Yeah.
survey or the appraisal or the
Title
title,
policy. Yeah.
and it just gets divided up that way, and it comes off of the top. And so everybody, if there are 5 heirs and the fee is, I'm just coming up with a number, but if it were $1,000, that'd be $200 each. If they can come up with $200 each, that comes off at the top.
Yep.
And so at the end, they're dividing up with all the expenses already having been paid. So it already gets divided up the way that it needs to. It's
That's a very beneficial way. And to be honest, it's very, very cooperative on an attorney's part to be able to offer that option, because you guys are doing the work up front. And
yes, and I will say is that sometimes it's a little bit irritating because, and this is just to be honest, is that the real estate agents do a lot of work. They put together things that I don't do, helping with financing and all those kinds of things. But the real estate agent gets things done, but we're taking care of a lot of times the things that have to be done before you even get to the sale.
Yep.
And that can be very time consuming, and the more that you can have done to avoid problems, the better it is, because that's where the expenses come in. Sometimes we have to get involved because there are other problems. There may be a boundary dispute, and you may need to have a boundary agreement, and so the attorney would help draft that and clear up other things. Those are separate and apart from a probate issue. But all of those fees, are expenses of the estate, and they come out in the end, whether if you do have someone who can advance the fees and pay them, which is what everybody would prefer, then those fees get paid out of the estate. So if I'm the executor, if I'm named executor, and I pay the attorney, $1,500 or whatever, then at the end, when the closing's done, all the money's paid, and there's $10,000, then I, as executor, get to be paid back my $1,500 first.
Yes.
That's an expense of the estate. It's not.
Because as an executor, you took action and you did not hold off the estate sale, so it is your priority. You have earned it to be reimbursed for those expenses up front. Yeah.
Correct, because it's not your personal expense.
Yes,
it's your expense for the benefit of the estate.
Yes. Exactly.
Excuse me.
Okay. Cool. That's phenomenal. So I'm so glad that you shared that. So to kind of help people who are listening to our conversation summarize, it sounds like that if anybody who has acquired property through inheritance or through will, so if there is a will or there's not a will, both groups of people can be helped by an attorney. When there is a will, sooner or later, it needs to be probated. And it sounds like from your conversation, longer people wait, more expensive it gets. So might as well just get started now. And if they don't have a will, they can still contact you. And through the administrative filing fees, that could be a little different than the probate one. They can still move forward with the estate sale.
Right. In that case, what someone needs to make sure is that they have the family history, so they can say, okay, mom died, and excuse me, mom died, and she didn't have a will.
Yeah.
And so I need to be able to what we do is we ask the court for a declaration of heirship. And so what we basically say, same thing, proof that there was a death. And now we just have to prove who, instead of looking at a will to say, what does the will say, my stuff goes. Intestacy means without a will, is determined by law. And so I need to know who the heirs are. And that may be a surviving spouse, or it may be both spouses have died, both mom and dad are deceased, and now it's going to all of the kids. Oh, and, Joe has died. He died before, and he's got 3 kids, and, on down I need to know who all of the heirs are, to the extent that I know when people, when they were born, when they died, the information to be able to prove to the court and give as much information as we can so that they can make a declaration, okay, we now know what the estate is, who gets it when it gets all divided up.
Yeah.
That's all that part is. It's just more complicated, and it takes a little bit more time, and there's more legwork that I just did one where this was property that the grandparents had, and so we had to go back. Nobody had done anything, and so we had to get the property done, and we had to do an affidavit of heirship and list all of those people. And sometimes when people don't know dates of death, if I have names, I know where they died, I can find that information. But if you have it, then
it's a head start.
Exactly.
So Paula,
exactly.
Just to help make sure everybody is clear on this, when there is a will, all they need is a copy of the will, the death certificate, and social security numbers of the parties involved to get started.
Right.
Now, in an event there is no will involved and it's intestate, there is no will involved. In that case, just have a death certificate and social security and name numbers of all the heirs they think could be possibly there.
Right. The children, all of the children, whether they're living or deceased. If they're deceased, then whether or not they had children, they're and on down the road. But yeah, that's what you do. And in that case, you can also have the court then name, it's instead of an executor, it's an administrator. And you can ask the court to have that person, if everybody agrees, that person could be an independent administrator. So you don't have to be back in court asking for permission for things.
Okay.
If not everybody agrees, then it's a dependent administration, and that's probably the one that most people get frustrated with because of how long it takes, because you have to ask permission to do everything, to spend anything, to pay things, and
that will take a long amount of time, and it can again add to the cost.
It does, but you can ask permission to sell the property first and to get that expense out, and then have the money to be able to take care of things.
Okay,
because
so you can liquidate
one of the other things one of the things that I need to point out too is that a lot of people don't realize that an executor or an administrator has, after they've been named, their obligations are to gather all of the assets of the estate, to make a determination of what all the valid debts against the estate are, to pay all of those debts that are valid. And when those debts have all been paid, then to distribute the assets according to the terms of the will or the court's order about who the heirs are. So debts have to be paid first. Those come first.
Debts must be, yes.
That may be
all
the mortgage.
Fees and debts must be paid first.
That may be the mortgage. It may be funeral expenses. It may be, outstanding electric bills. I mean, there are all kinds of things.
HOA fees, property taxes, unpaid indemnities. Yep.
Right. And some of those things can be paid out of the sales proceeds. Some of it you may sell the personal property first. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, if you have an estate that is, that the debts are greater than the value of the assets, including the home. Mm-hmm. There are ways sometimes, if we proceed in a particular way, that there may, the creditors may not follow the rules correctly, and so you may be able to get
collections,
get out of those debts. But that's what an attorney can help you with, to try to. The goal is to make sure that someone follows the law, distributes the estate in the proper way. But our goal is always to make sure that the beneficiaries are the ones that benefit, and not everyone else.
And by everyone else, we mean people like creditors who should have probably dropped the liens on the property or the collections because they have not followed statute of limitations properly. So,
statute of limitations, sometimes they don't. There's a very specific way that they have to submit a claim, and they may not do that. And in that case, the executor is not allowed to pay those amounts. And again, it depends on which kind of process you're going through.
Yeah.
You mentioned early on a muniment of title. that is done only when there are no debts, and that's a
Mhm.
very straightforward way of doing things.
Yes.
And it may not be, if you've got property that you want to get sold and there are multiple heirs, you may not want to use that, because then it's like
Mhm.
everybody has to sign, as opposed to an executor where you just have one person. But
Yeah.
but
It sounds
those are the questions that a lawyer will help you figure out, and to move through the most efficiently um,
very
as
nice.
possible.
Very nice. Awesome. I love it. I think it couldn't have been said any simpler that ultimately from being a very close listener to your conversation today, it sounds like have a will, not have a will, have a death certificate ready and social security numbers ready, and be ready to speak with an attorney to really figure out what the options are. And thereafter, attorney can determine for them if it's an uncontested will where there's no heirs, what is the best option to go on that route, and if there is someone that has a lot of debts and other things to clear off, then what's the best option? So it seems like a pretty easy head start. And now this is something I've been asked a lot, Paula. With COVID happening and everything changing, the courts are getting backed up. Courts were not open back in when shutdown happened. So
Mhm.
how has everything changed? Is everything back to normal again? Are people are
Um,
profiting? Share with us.
I'm not really sure that they're back to normal. I know they're not back to normal.
Yeah.
What they are, though, is that there's a very good process for moving through things, particularly
Mm,
when there is a will.
mm,
It's actually, in many ways, it's more streamlined, and it's working really well.
mhm,
Um, I have had, unfortunately, I've had several people, clients of mine, have died in this time period, and I can give you some pretty good dates on it. I have one client who died around the 1st of July.
mhm,
We had the will.
mhm,
I had, as soon as I got a death certificate, they brought it to me.
mhm.
Um, we have already had the hearing.
Wow.
We have already gotten letters of administration, and we are ready to start doing an inventory and moving through selling some property. He died, I believe, on July 1st. We had a hearing on the 13th of August,
Mhm.
and we're already moving through all of that stuff.
Very nice.
Um,
Very nice.
it can
That's
be done
optimistic.
very quickly because the hearings are all being done telephonically or by Zoom. We
Mhm.
submit all of the paperwork, everything that's done. Um, I always tell people is that your meeting with me the first time is going to take about 10 times longer than the hearing. The hearing lasts about 10 minutes maximum, but that's because we've already gotten everything done when
Yes,
we file,
filed.
and then we submit all of the paperwork that we have to do afterwards in order to have the hearing. We submit to the court for the hearing.
Mhm.
We have the hearing. We send these things, things that have to be notarized and sent back to the court so that we can get letters. All of that happens. All of that work is done so that it's just very, very efficiently handled. And like I said, because you don't have to go and find a parking place. You don't have to go down to the court right now because
Yeah.
they are having no in-person hearings.
Yes.
It's moving very quickly.
Yeah.
But what it is that the system stays the same. It's just that you don't have to go down to court.
Yeah.
Um, it's a little bit difficult. It's a little bit more if there is a contest, if there's a fight about the will, if there are, complications requiring hearings. That's a little bit more difficult because it's harder to find the time to do that. And but that doesn't happen that often.
There you go.
Most cases
Mm.
are pretty straightforward, and the same thing with the affidavits of heirship. I mean, not affidavits, the declaration of heirship and the appointment of an administration. We do it all by phone. We submit everything in advance. Everybody knows what's coming, that's also happening pretty quickly. It's a little bit longer because there's another lawyer involved to verify everything that we've put in the application, and we have to have two non what are called disinterested witnesses who can
Mhm.
say, yeah, all of the facts that you have about this family history of this person who has died, I've checked it all out, it's all correct.
Correct.
And um, and so it's a little bit different. But
That's right.
again, it's happening pretty easily.
Pretty easily. So glad to hear
COVID
that.
hasn't made that many changes. The bigger changes that we have are with contested hearings where we have to have trials.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I haven't had any of those. So we
So it sounds like
I
from
try to get them arranged so that we don't have to go to trial, where we can reach an agreement beforehand,
before
because
we go to
trials are expensive.
yeah, seems like if as emotional as this process could be, and it's sad that sometimes that's how we get to know people, but in this moment we always need someone who can think logically for us and help us navigate through this difficult time, or some conflicting times. And looking back, we can all say that we did right by them, and the client we served was able to have a peace of mind that their estate is preserved rather than all paid in collections and debts. So it
Right.
sounds very
And
informative.
I will say is that I think that people should understand too is that I've been doing this for a long time. I did it, but I also have been in a situation where I lost my husband. So I know the emotional toll that it takes on you and how difficult it is to deal with these issues at a time of great sorrow. And my job is it is the most gratifying area of the law to me, because this is overwhelming to clients, and it is painful and it's hard, and my job is to take as much of that burden off of people as they need me to. Some people want to do a lot of stuff on their own. Other people just want to know where they have to sign. My job is to communicate with people and to try to help them work through it, and to ultimately, for me, I know how to do it, and so it's not overwhelming. I can step into that role, and that's, the word attorney also comes from a Latin root. It means to substitute. So what it is I'm just coming in to substitute for you, to do what you could do, but I know how to get it done more efficiently.
Yeah.
And to spare you the details of business when you need to be dealing with your family and your grief, and not have to deal with this stuff. Like, did I follow the right rule? Did I file it on the right day? That sort of thing.
I thank you so much for showing up so kindly for people in this time, and still keeping that mind where they can be protected and their rights can be preserved and their estate can be preserved. So
Exactly.
Paula, I know you mentioned in the beginning that you handle a lot of services around real estate. So for listeners who are listening to our conversation today, what other services do you provide in addition to probate services as an attorney?
I primarily I help people draft their wills. I do
Draft wills.
estate planning, so that's one. I do guardianship. So if you have the most common thing is for parents who have Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, or have had a stroke, or just have certain kinds of disabilities that prevent them from making
Decisions.
decisions on their own. So I do guardianships. I also, and the other thing is a lot of times you'll have one of the children, who's maybe 55 years old, and everybody's always taking care of him, but he's got Down syndrome, and now he has to sign a document, and it's like, okay, now what do we do? So we work around that as well. Children. I also, for example, I have a client today who called and said, well, I was buying this piece of property, and I've bought it now, and we paid it all off, but I was buying it from this other guy, and so now we've got a release, but it releases him, and the guy won't give me a deed. It's like, okay, well, I can handle that. So I draft the deeds. I can look at real estate contracts for people.
Nice.
A lot of times there's a sale that's going through. It's not a probate issue, but like I said, it may be a situation where, there's a contract and the people haven't complied, or you find out that the property is in the floodplain, and so how do I get out of the contract, or how do I, just a variety of things. Sometimes as simple as doing a deed. sometimes as complicated as having to do a suit to quiet title because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's gone and no one's around. Sometimes we have to do partition suits because you have an estate that's gone so bad and people are so disagreeable that we have to get an order from the court that says the
Mm-hmm.
property has to be sold and divided up. So
Yeah.
there are a variety of things. Sometimes people just very simply want me to look at their contract to see if that's okay.
Sounds great.
We do in estate planning deeds to make sure that people can stay in their home and still qualify for, or they may need to qualify for benefits so that they go into a nursing home, but they don't want to lose their property, or so we help them preserve their estate so that they can get the benefits of governmental from the government and still preserve something for the family. It's not always appropriate and it's not always possible, but again, it's easier to find out. I would tell people is that, it's better to ask and have me say, no, you can't do that, than
You mean
to wait and wait and wait and say, well, I know I can't do this.
Wow.
And then you find out that you could have, but you waited too long.
too long?
It's just a simple thing. The worst answer, sometimes if the worst answer that you get is exactly what you think it's going to be, then why not ask the question and make sure,
How beautiful. I'm going to steal that from you, Paula. That's such a beautiful
Go right
thing you
ahead.
said. Yeah, if the worst answer you can hear is no, then why not just ask that question and hear a no, because you're already prepared for it. How beautiful. But
Right.
yeah,
And
it's
sometimes it
not
may
that
be
easy to get over the fear. Mm-hmm.
right. That's, I think, the biggest thing is that, and lawyers, I think, have a poor reputation in many ways. But the thing is that when you need a lawyer, you need someone who can give you advice and can help
Yes.
you. Every law license for every lawyer in this state says attorney and counselor at law. We give advice to. All lawyers are not, going into a lawsuit to fight about things.
Yes.
Most lawyers want to help you solve your problems.
Yeah,
And that's
prevent that
all it is.
difficult situation to happen. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Exactly. And
So,
to give you advice to avoid problems.
yes, absolutely. And I have often found from my conversation with clients that a simple conversation with an attorney has saved them tens of thousands of dollars in future. And that intimidation
It's
can
hard
be
for people to realize that because
realize
they still
that.
have to pay us sometimes a
Yeah,
lot of money. But, it's a balancing,
balance.
you know.
So, on a closing note, Paula, I would love to know, you work with a wide variety of people, right? You work with realtors who show up and help. You know, something for me to take away from this conversation. How do you think real estate professionals like me can show up in your life and in lives of people who are going through probate to make the process easier? Like, how do we take the non-legal work off y'all's plate and help families move along as well? How do we need to show up?
I'm not, that's a kind of a hard question because I think the biggest thing is to get them in to talk to me and to then be able to assist us in getting what we need done. A lot of times people say you need to get this, this, and this, and they just don't even have a clue. A lot of things that I'm able, we can get for clients who can't come in with it. As I said, if you don't know when your grandmother died, but she died and she's was buried in Katy, Texas. Well, if you can give me the name, then I can find, I may be able to find a copy. The By looking up grave records, I can find when the birth and date was and that sort of thing. So a lot of times it's just getting them in and trying, if the real estate agent also would make sure when they ask at the beginning are there any title problems? Because what I see a lot of times is that there is a rush to get the contract.
Yeah.
And then they get down to closing. It's 2 weeks before closing. And I said, well,
all these problems popped up on the title now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think that for me to have is to have the real estate agent that they're dealing with really be aware of what the issues are and to explain those to the client why it's necessary to get this done before you put it on the market.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's usually a rush to get it on the market, and that just ends up having all kinds of problems. The other thing is to be very clear about who has possession of the property, if there are issues about people not wanting to move out, just sort of the background, and then to assist us to assist in helping the client get the information together. And sometimes, lawyers we're busy a lot of times, and we're hard to get a hold of, especially now when we've got our assistants are working remotely, and so
there's a delay
most of
in
us,
the communication
yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
But it is nice to be able to have someone who can assist us to get this stuff moving along. And sometimes it's the attorneys, but sometimes it's the clients who just don't get the information to us that we need to have.
Yeah.
And just being, like I said, I think the most of it is to have people do things in a timely way. Don't list the property before
Cleaning
you've
the
got
title up and dissolving. Yeah.
find out if there are going to be ashes. Okay, I know that your mother died. Did you guys probate your dad's will? I'd like to know that beforehand instead of afterwards and have to do, those kinds of things. It's just a sort of an informational thing. If there's a probate issue involved, the more information that I have, and know in advance, are you and your brothers and sisters all getting along? Is there anyone that you think is not going to be in agreement with this? That often comes with the person who said, well, Mom and Dad said I could live here for my whole life.
Oh, no.
Maybe that works and maybe that doesn't work. But it's nice to know that in advance, because it gives the attorney an ability to communicate with the client and help them explain and a realtor to help explain why we need to do these things and why we need to get an agreement instead of, filing lawsuits about it.
Absolutely. So it sounds like as important it is for a client to be informed about what they can do next, it's important that the realtor that they're choosing to work with is informed of the process as well, so they don't rush a real estate piece property into sale. Because quite frankly, Paula, I got to help families who couldn't sell their homes the very first time around. And maybe that's how I got to work with you on the back end a lot through title companies. Because but when houses are not sold, we get to the problem and we figure out, oh my God, before we even stick the sign in the yard or put it on MLS, there was a full 3-month project that needed to be completed. And if we do go under contract, it can jeopardize the equity of a seller if they have not resolved the title issues before, because buyer has an upper hand now. Yes, absolutely.
That is it. And I will tell you that is a huge problem in situations where there are reverse mortgages.
Yep.
And a lot of times many of the family members don't even know that there was one. And I had a case not too long ago that a piece of property that started out with a debt that was $121,000. By the time it got all done, because of all of the fighting and the delays and the this and the that, the lien was up to over $200,000.
Wow.
And on top
Because
of
it's a reverse
that,
mortgage, right? Because the money is slipping out of the bank's loan and increasing the lien every day.
It's just increasing all of that. And that's not always the case, but it is sometimes. And the other part of that is that in the meantime, there was nobody paying the taxes, so the taxes got added in there. And the other thing is the house was vacant and it had maintenance issues. So we didn't get to sell the property for as much as it was actually worth at the time.
Mm-hmm.
The liens went up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a tragedy because there was very little to be divided up at the end.
Yep.
And so, and everybody's mad, but it was also, it could have been avoided.
It could happen.
And as I said, the other thing is that the rush to put things on the market with inexperienced, and I hate to say this because it's a generalization, but I would encourage people to, some of the worst situations that I've had is when a piece of property has gotten listed too quickly and a contract signed by some of the heirs and not all of the heirs, and then all the problems start coming up. And if you've got a family member who is the real estate agent and everybody thinks this is a good way of doing it, it just makes it worse. But I think that if you need to have someone who has experience with probate matters.
Yep.
Because because if the real estate agent has experience with probate matters, then they're going to be working with a title company that knows how these things work too. And it's not always easy, and they get messy. And the worst are when people are wanting to have us do something quickly. It just doesn't happen quickly.
Yeah, there's no quickly. We try to rush it. We break the whole system, and now there's cost involved in fixing what's broken. And I actually got called in when properties couldn't sell and all this mess was happening, and I was now discovering all this, and I was like, oh my God, why did we even get started? So I was often called in to clean up the mess, and that's how I learned.
Exactly.
I was like, well, why always clean up after somebody has messed it up? I made it to my husband and I, we do real estate full time, and we have good resources, great people like you in our acquaintances. And we were like, you know what? We're going to do our part to help people avoid this day.
Yeah.
And people would listen and some might not. But slowly, if I continue my effort, our work has to have a little bit more impact than just meeting when people are calling us. I think we can make our community a better place by just offering a little bit of educational, informative content.
I think that's what it is that if people knew that waiting wasn't going to help, and there's many attorneys out there that are really good at doing this sort of thing. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be wildly expensive. It's a necessary expense for things. And many people, I tell people, is that very often there's nothing magical about being a lawyer. But what it means, there's nothing magical about being a mechanic either. But if my car breaks down, I could probably fix it. I could get a book and I could get the tools and I could figure it out and it'd probably be okay. But what was I going to do when I come up with a screw over here? I don't know where it goes. Maybe it's important, maybe it's not. I'm not going to know until I start driving it. Same thing with the lawyer. Or the other thing is, it's going to take me, if I do that, it's going to take me 4 or 5 days to get something done. Or if I took it to a mechanic, one, I know everything is going to get done correctly and it's going to work, or they're going to fix it. And the other thing is they can do it in 2 hours, something that took me, forever. And that's the value of a lawyer. That's the value of a real estate agent.
Yep.
They know this thing. It doesn't mean that the other people don't know or couldn't learn or anything magical about what we do. It's just that's where our training is.
Yes, when things go wrong, that's when the value really shows up, and our job is to prevent that from happening.
That's right. You go to someone who knows what they're doing to get it done efficiently and in the proper way. And I think that's true of everything. I do think that the big things are just fear of how much it's going to cost. But like I said, you can pay me now, you can pay me later, because eventually somebody's going to have to get it cleaned up.
Paula, I truly enjoyed. I completely lost track of time and space while talking to you. So,
I have no idea what time it is.
It is so beautiful. I had, a depth of conversation. I honestly think a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing our conversation today. They're going to relate to different scenarios we presented. And I would love to entertain questions. So if you guys are listening to our conversation with Paula Salinas today, please comment below and share with us what has been the hardest thing for you guys. What do you find yourself stuck into? Because the question, it could be as easy just having a conversation with Paula as an attorney or myself and my team as a real estate professionals. It doesn't obligate you to anything, but just being aware what your options are will make you well capable of knowing what to do next. So Paula, thank you so much for your
very welcome.
time.
Thank you.
And I look forward to hopefully seeing you in future again.
Okay.
You.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay.